Dr. Sarah Chen rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the chronometer display showing 0347 hours station time. The research facility orbiting Kepler 442b hummed quietly around her, its automated systems maintaining perfect environmental conditions while she worked through another sleepless night. As the lead xenocommunications specialist for the Terran Deep Space Monitoring Project, Sarah had spent the last 8 years listening to the cosmic background radiation, hoping to detect signs of intelligent life. So far, the universe had remained stubbornly silent. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she took another sip anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. The detection algorithms had been running for months without a single anomaly worth investigating. Every signal they'd picked up had turned out to be natural phenomena, pulsars, quasars, or the death cries of distant stars. The funding committee back on Earth was growing impatient, and Sarah knew her project was living on borrowed time. She was about to call it a night when the primary detection grid lit up like a Christmas tree. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the cascade of alerts flooding her screens. The signal was coming from beyond the galactic edge, approximately 47,000 light-years from their current position. What made it extraordinary wasn't just its origin. It was the complexity of the waveform patterns. This was artificial. This was intelligent. This was what she'd been waiting her entire career to find. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, isolating the signal and running it through the translation matrices. The communication protocols were unlike anything in human databases, but there were mathematical constants embedded in the transmission that provided a foundation for decryption. Prime numbers, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, the golden ratio. Universal concepts that any intelligent species would understand. As the translation algorithm worked, Sarah found herself holding her breath. The first coherent words appeared on her screen, and her blood ran cold. Emergency broadcast to any receiving civilization. This is Zephyrian colony ship Windseeker. We are under attack by entities we designate as the Devourers. They consume everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire systems. Nothing escapes them. They have already destroyed our homeworld and 17 colony systems. We are the last of our kind. If anyone receives this transmission, please help us, please. We have children aboard. They've done nothing wrong. Coordinates follow. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, her scientific mind warring with her human compassion. This was first contact, the moment that would change humanity's place in the universe forever. But it was also a cry for help from a dying species, possibly the last survivors of their entire civilization. She pulled up the star charts and input the coordinates. The Zephyrian ship was approximately 3,000 light-years away, well beyond human space but not impossibly distant. If they left immediately using their newest FTL drives, a rescue mission could reach them in perhaps 6 months. But Sarah knew she couldn't make this decision alone. She activated her emergency communication array and sent a priority transmission to Earth, copying Admiral Rebecca Torres at the Colonial Defense Command and Dr. James Harrison at the Institute for Xenobiological Studies. While waiting for their responses, Sarah continued monitoring the Zephyrian transmission. What she discovered next made her stomach twist with anxiety. The signal was getting weaker, and embedded within it were what could only be described as combat reports. Hull breach in sections 7 through 12. We've lost contact with engineering. The entities are boarding us. They're not like anything we've encountered before. They don't use technology, they are technology. Living ships that adapt and evolve as they fight. Our weapons are useless against them. They're learning from every defense we mount. A pause, then. This is Commander Veltar to any receiving station. We estimate 47 minutes until total hull failure. We are transmitting all our scientific data, cultural archives, and historical records. If we cannot survive, perhaps our knowledge can live on through others. We tried to warn the Galactic Council, but they refused to listen. They said the Devourers were just a myth, a story to frighten children. They were wrong. The Devourers are real, and they're coming for everyone. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Galactic Council? There were other intelligent species out there, organized into some kind of governing body, and humanity apparently wasn't part of it? The implications were staggering, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate crisis. Her communication board chimed as responses began arriving from Earth. Admiral Torres was the first to respond, her usually composed demeanor cracking under the weight of the revelation. Dr. Chen, are you absolutely certain this transmission is genuine? If what you're telling us is true, we're looking at first contact with not one, but potentially multiple alien species. And at least one of them is in mortal danger. Dr. Harrison's response followed minutes later. Sarah, I've reviewed the linguistic patterns and mathematical frameworks you transmitted. This is definitely authentic alien communication. The complexity of their language suggests a highly advanced civilization with sophisticated scientific understanding. We need to help them. But it was the response from Director Catherine Voss, head of the Terran Colonial Authority, that surprised her most. Dr. Chen, you are to maintain absolute secrecy about this discovery until further notice. We're convening an emergency session of the Security Council. Do not respond to the alien transmission under any circumstances. Sarah stared at the directive in disbelief. How could they even consider ignoring a distress call? These beings were dying, possibly the last remnants of their entire species, and Earth's leadership wanted to form committees and hold meetings? She looked back at her screens where the Zephyrian transmissions continued to weaken. The timestamps showed the messages were taking nearly 6 hours to reach her, traveling at light speed across the vast distances of space. By the time Earth's politicians finished their debates, the Zephyrians would be long dead. Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of human history. She opened a new transmission channel and began composing a response. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, knowing that her next words would be humanity's first communication with an alien species. Zephyrian vessel Windseeker, this is Dr. Sarah Chen of the Terran Deep Space Monitoring Project. We have received your distress call and are organizing a rescue mission. You are not alone. Humanity stands ready to help those in need, regardless of species or origin. Hold position and maintain hope. Help is coming. As she prepared to send the transmission, Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She was about to announce humanity's presence to the galaxy, potentially exposing Earth to unknown dangers. But she also knew that some decisions transcended politics and protocol. When someone called for help, decent people answered. The transmission sent, Sarah immediately began working on the technical aspects of a rescue mission. She pulled up the specifications for the TCS Defiance, humanity's newest and most advanced exploration vessel, currently docked at the shipyard orbiting Mars. The ship was designed for long-range missions and carried the latest in human technology, fusion reactors, quantum computers, and experimental weapon systems that had never been tested in actual combat. More importantly, the Defiance carried a crew of humanity's finest. Captain Marcus Webb, a decorated veteran of the colonial wars. Commander Elena Vasquez, the best tactical officer in the fleet. Dr. Angela Foster, a xenobiologist who had spent her career preparing for the day humanity would meet alien life. Chief Engineer Ryan O'Sullivan, a technical genius who could make anything work with enough time and spare parts. Sarah sent detailed mission parameters to the Defiance's crew, along with all the data she'd gathered about the Zephyrians and their mysterious attackers. She knew that by the time her transmission reached Mars, the political fallout from her unauthorized response would be in full swing. But she also knew that Captain Webb would understand the moral imperative of their situation. As the hours passed, Sarah continued monitoring the weakening Zephyrian transmissions. The messages became increasingly desperate as their situation deteriorated. This is Acting Commander Xylin. Commander Veltar is dead. The entities have breached our central core. We're running on emergency power only. Our children, we've moved them to the most secure sections of the ship, but we cannot protect them much longer. To whoever is listening, please remember us. Remember that we tried to warn everyone. The Devourers consume not just matter and energy. They absorb the memories and knowledge of their victims. Each species they destroy makes them stronger, more intelligent, more dangerous. Sarah's heart broke as she listened to the transmissions. These were real people with families, hopes, and dreams, facing extinction at the hands of something unimaginably terrible. She had to believe that somehow humanity could make a difference. Her faith was rewarded when a new transmission arrived from Mars. Captain Webb's voice, steady and determined despite the gravity of the situation, came through clearly. Dr. Chen, this is Captain Webb aboard the TCS Defiance. We've reviewed your data and mission parameters. The crew has volunteered for immediate departure. We understand the risks, but we cannot stand by while an intelligent species faces genocide. We're departing Mars orbit in 6 hours. Expected arrival at the Zephyrian position in 5 months, 18 days. Tell them to hold on. Humanity is coming. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever forces might be listening. Humanity was about to take its first steps onto the galactic stage, and they were doing so not as conquerors or explorers, but as rescuers. She hoped it wouldn't be their last act as a species. The universe, it seemed, was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But as Sarah watched the Defiance's departure burn brighten in the darkness between worlds, She felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The Galactic Council chamber on Nexus Prime erupted into chaos the moment the emergency session was called to order. Representatives from 47 member species filled the vast amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, lights, and pheromonal signals that the translation system struggled to process simultaneously. Ambassador Kethvar of the Hegemony, a crystalline being whose body pulsed with frustrated orange light, was the first to speak. This is unprecedented. In 3,000 years, the containment protocols have never been breached. How did the humans detect a transmission from so far beyond their designated territory? Council Chairman Zorthek, an ancient Vorthan whose multiple eye stalks fixed on different council members as he spoke, raised one of his primary appendages for silence. The more pressing question is, how do we respond to this development? Our long-term stability depends on keeping humanity isolated until they mature enough to join galactic civilization properly. Ambassador Telana of the Silk Weavers, her gossamer wings shimmering with anxiety patterns, projected her concerns directly into the chamber's telepathic network. The humans have already transmitted a response to the Zephyrian distress call. They're mobilizing a rescue mission. Should we intervene? A wave of uncomfortable silence rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrians had been a minor species, curious scientists and philosophers who had rejected council membership centuries ago to pursue independent exploration. Their fate had been sealed the moment they ventured beyond the galactic edge into the dead zones, where things best left undisturbed waited in the darkness between galaxies. Ambassador Kratok of the Assault Coordinators, a heavily armored insectoid whose species had once been warriors before joining the Council, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Zephyrians knew the risks when they rejected our protection. We established the boundary zones for a reason. What lies beyond the galactic edge is not our concern. But the humans don't know about the boundary zones, interjected Ambassador Yilmoth of the Deep Swimmers, her aquatic form undulating in its mobile habitat tank. They don't understand what they're sailing into. Should we not warn them? Chairman Zorthek's eye stalk swiveled to focus on the Void Watcher's representative, a being so ancient and ethereal that it barely maintained physical form in normal space. When the Void Watcher spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around its words. The Compact of Silence has served the galaxy well for 3 millennia. Humanity was placed in quarantine not out of malice, but out of necessity. They are unique among galactic species. Their response to threats is unlike anything we have encountered before. Ambassador Hestrel of the Trade Syndicate, practical as always, raised the economic implications. If humanity makes contact with other species outside our control, it could destabilize the entire galactic economy. Their technological development has been remarkable even in isolation. Given access to our knowledge base and trade networks, they could upset the balance we've maintained for centuries. The chamber fell silent as the weight of the situation settled over the assembled representatives. Humanity's quarantine hadn't been implemented out of cruelty, but out of fear. The Council's xenoarchaeologists had studied human history extensively, and what they'd found had terrified them. Humans were the only species they'd encountered that had independently developed over a dozen different methods of planetary sterilization before achieving interstellar flight. They waged war with a creativity and intensity that bordered on artistic in its destruction. More troubling still was humanity's tendency to form emotional bonds with other species. Unlike the Council races, who maintained careful diplomatic distances and formal alliance structures, humans had a disturbing habit of adopting other species' causes as their own. They seemed incapable of viewing galactic politics as a zero-sum game. Ambassador Telana's wings flickered with new patterns as she accessed recent intelligence reports. Our monitoring stations report that the human vessel TCS Defiance is already en route to the Zephyrian position. Captain Marcus Webb, commanding. Our files on him indicate a decorated combat veteran with a history of unconventional tactical decisions. Chairman Zorthek felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: genuine uncertainty. The Council had faced crises before, but never one quite like this. Their entire civilization was built on careful balance, measured responses, and diplomatic solutions. Humans, from what they'd observed, preferred direct action. What do we know about these devourers the Zephyrians mentioned? Asked Ambassador Mordell of the Analytical Collective. His cybernetic implants processing data streams faster than organic minds could follow. The Void Watcher's form shimmered with something that might have been fear. The entities beyond the galactic edge are not of this reality. They are remnants of previous galactic cycles, beings that survived the cosmic resets that occur every few billion years. They consume not just matter and energy, but information itself. the quantum patterns that define existence. Each galaxy they devour makes them stronger, more complex, more capable of spreading to the next. A collective shudder rippled through the chamber as the implications sank in. These weren't just alien invaders, they were an existential threat to reality itself. The boundary zones exist to contain them, the Void Watcher continued. For millions of years, we've maintained a careful equilibrium. They feed on the cosmic radiation and dark matter beyond the galactic edge, and we ensure that no signals or ships cross into their territory to attract their attention. The Zephyrians' exploration broke that containment. Ambassador Cathvar's crystalline form flared with angry red light. Then we must stop the humans before they make the situation worse. A single ship against entities that can devour entire star systems? They'll only provide the Devourers with new information to absorb. But Chairman Zorthek was studying the tactical displays showing the Defiance's projected route, and something about human spacecraft design caught his attention. Unlike Council vessels, which were built for efficiency and long-term operation, human ships were clearly designed with combat as a primary consideration. The Defiance carried enough firepower to sterilize a small moon, and its defense systems were unlike anything in the Council databases. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should observe before we act. Humanity has surprised us before with their technological innovations. Their approach to problems is unconventional. The debate that followed would have continued for days under normal Council procedures, but events in deep space were moving faster than diplomatic protocols could accommodate. While the representatives argued about jurisdiction and proper procedures, the Defiance was pushing its FTL drives to maximum capacity, racing toward a rendezvous with forces beyond their understanding. Meanwhile, in the Defiance's mission briefing room, Captain Marcus Webb stood before a holographic display showing their destination. His crew had volunteered for this mission knowing it might be a one-way trip, but the mood in the room was determined rather than somber. Ladies and gentlemen, Webb began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him loyalty from crews across the colonial fleet. We're about to make history. First contact with an alien species under circumstances none of our training prepared us for. We're not explorers on this mission. We're rescuers. Commander Elena Vasquez, his tactical officer, studied the limited data they had about the Devourers. Captain, based on the Zephyrian reports, these entities adapt to any weapons used against them. Our conventional armaments might be useless. Dr. Angela Foster, the mission's xenobiologist, looked up from her analysis of the Zephyrian language patterns. That assumes they're biological entities. From what I can determine from their transmissions, the Zephyrians describe them as living technology, something that exists at the intersection of consciousness and machinery. Chief Engineer Ryan O'Sullivan ran his hands through his graying hair as he studied the technical readouts. If they absorb and adapt to technology, maybe our best bet is to avoid fighting them directly. We extract the survivors and run. Webb nodded thoughtfully. That's the plan. We're not going there to wage war against something that destroyed an entire civilization. We're going to save whoever we can and gather intelligence for Earth. He paused, looking at each of his officers in turn. But if these Devourers think they can hunt down refugees without consequences, they're about to learn something about humanity. The captain's words carried a quiet promise that sent a chill through the briefing room. Each crew member understood that they weren't just representing Earth on this mission. They were establishing humanity's first impression on the galactic stage. And if that impression was going to be formed in combat against entities that consumed entire worlds, then humanity would make it count. Back on Nexus Prime, the Council session had devolved into multiple separate debates as species formed informal alliances around different response strategies. Some wanted to intercept the Defiance and force it to turn back. Others argued for sending their own ships to contain whatever the humans might unleash. A few radical voices even suggested that humanity might be exactly what the galaxy needed. A species too stubborn to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. But as the hours passed and reports continued to arrive from monitoring stations, one thing became clear. The humans weren't slowing down. If anything, they were accelerating, pushing their technology beyond recommended safety margins in their urgency to reach the Zephyrians. Chairman Zorthek finally called for silence, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber with the weight of centuries. We have spent 3,000 years building a civilization based on careful balance and measured responses. Perhaps it is time to see what can be accomplished with reckless courage and righteous anger. The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, the galaxy held its breath. Somewhere in the darkness between worlds, humanity was about to collide with forces that had destroyed civilizations before Earth's sun had finished forming. The outcome of that collision would determine not just the fate of the Zephyrian survivors, but the future relationship between humanity and the rest of galactic civilization. For better or worse, the age of humanity's isolation was coming to an end. The TCS Defiance dropped out of FTL space with all the grace of a falling meteor, its hull crackling with residual energy discharges from pushing their quantum drives far beyond manufacturer specifications. Captain Marcus Webb gripped the armrests of his command chair as the ship's inertial dampeners struggled to compensate for their violent transition back to normal space. "Status report?" Webb ordered, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge. Lieutenant Sarah Kim at the navigation station was the first to respond. "We're approximately 50,000 kilometers from the last known position of the Zephyrian vessel, Captain. Sensors are still calibrating after the jump, but I'm detecting massive debris fields throughout this system." Commander Elena Vasquez looked up from her tactical console, her expression grim. "Sir, I'm reading the remains of at least 12 different spacecraft in the immediate vicinity. The energy signatures suggest they were destroyed within the last 72 hours. Dr. Spare." Angela Foster, monitoring the xenobiological sensors from her position at the science station, felt her blood run cold as the data streams updated. "Captain, I'm detecting massive organic signatures throughout the debris field. Whatever did this, it's still here." Webb nodded grimly. They had arrived too late to prevent the Zephyrians' destruction, but perhaps not too late to find survivors. "Mr. O'Sullivan, what's the status of our defensive systems?" The chief engineer's voice came through the comm from the engine room. "All weapon systems are online and ready, Captain. Our new plasma cannons are charged, and I've got our experimental shielding running at maximum efficiency. But, sir, based on what the Zephyrians transmitted about these devourers adapting to any weapons used against them, I'd recommend we avoid engagement if possible." "Understood. Commander Vasquez, begin a systematic scan of the debris field. Look for escape pods, emergency beacons, anything that might indicate survivors."
As the Defiance moved cautiously through the graveyard of ships, the crew began to understand the scope of the destruction they were witnessing.
The Zephyrian vessels had been beautiful once, graceful constructions that seemed to blend organic curves with crystalline technology. Now they drifted in pieces, their hulls torn open as if by some massive predator. Dr. Foster was analyzing the composition of the debris when something caught her attention. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual quantum resonance patterns in the wreckage. It's as if the molecular bonds in the whole materials have been rewritten. Whatever destroyed these ships didn't just damage them. It fundamentally altered their atomic structure." Before Webb could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began blaring. Lieutenant Kim's voice rose with barely controlled fear. "Sir, we have contact. Bearing 047 Mach 12. Distance, it's hard to tell. The object is massive, but it's not showing up properly on our sensors. On the main view screen, space seemed to ripple and distort. Where there should have been stars, there was something that hurt to look at directly, a presence that seemed to exist partially outside normal reality. As they watched, the distortion began to move toward them with impossible speed. "Evasive maneuvers!" Webb ordered. All hands battle stations. The Defiance banked hard to port, its engines screaming as O'Sullivan pushed them beyond redline. But the entity pursuing them moved like liquid thought, flowing through space without regard for physics as humans understood it. Commander Vasquez's fingers flew over her tactical displays. "Captain, I'm trying to lock weapons, but our targeting systems can't get a solid reading. It's like trying to aim at a ghost." Dr. Foster watched the sensor readings with growing horror. "It's not moving through space. It's rewriting space around itself. The entity exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our weapons are designed for three-dimensional targets. The thing hunting them was unlike anything in human experience. It resembled a massive organism, but one constructed from crystallized space-time and living mathematics. Tendrils of warped reality stretched out from its core, reaching for the Defiance with hungry purpose. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim reported, "I'm detecting communication signals from the entity. It's trying to interface with our computer systems." Webb felt ice run down his spine. "Isolate all networks immediately. Nothing gets through our firewalls." But even as he spoke, the ship's lights began to flicker. The Devourer wasn't just trying to communicate, it was learning. With each passing second, it grew more sophisticated in its attempts to penetrate their systems. That was when Chief Engineer O'Sullivan's voice crackled over the intercom with barely controlled excitement. "Captain, I've got an idea. These things adapt to whatever we throw at them, right? They learn from our technology and use it against us. That's what the Zephyrians reported, yes. Well, what if we give them something they can't adapt to, something so fundamentally human that it doesn't make logical sense? Before Webb could ask for clarification, O'Sullivan had already begun implementing his plan. Throughout the ship, the carefully calibrated fusion reactors began to operate in a pattern that should have been impossible. They were running on controlled instability, their output fluctuating in seemingly random patterns that somehow maintained perfect balance. The effect was immediate and startling. The Devourer's pursuit suddenly became erratic, its movements losing the fluid grace it had displayed before. The entity seemed confused, unable to process the paradox of systems that functioned precisely because they shouldn't work at all. Engineering principles be damned. O'Sullivan's voice carried a note of triumph. Sometimes the best solution is the one that makes no sense. I'm running our entire propulsion system on controlled chaos. Every time that thing tries to analyze how our engines work, the parameters change. Dr. Foster stared at her readings in amazement. The entity is actually backing away. It can't process illogical systems. Its entire existence is based on consuming and integrating rational patterns of information. But their victory was short-lived. As the first Devourer retreated, space around them began to shimmer as more entities emerged from the spaces between dimensions. The Defiance had stumbled into a feeding ground, and their presence had attracted attention. Captain, Commander Vasquez reported, I'm counting at least 8 more contacts converging on our position. They're coordinating their approach. Webb made a decision that would echo through galactic history. Instead of retreating, he opened a channel to Earth on the quantum communication array. His message would take 6 hours to reach home, but what he had to report couldn't wait for their return. This is Captain Webb, aboard the TCS Defiance. We have confirmed the existence of hostile entities beyond the galactic edge. These Devourers represent an existential threat not just to humanity, but to all intelligent life. They consume information itself, growing stronger with each civilization they destroy. We're engaging them now to buy time for any Zephyrian survivors, but Earth needs to be warned. This isn't just first contact, this is a declaration of war against reality itself. As Webb ended his transmission, proximity alarms screamed as the remaining Devourers closed in from multiple vectors. But rather than retreat, the Defiance's crew did something that no other galactic species had ever attempted in the face of such overwhelming odds. They fought back. Then, Commander Vasquez fired everything they had: plasma cannons, particle beams, nuclear torpedoes, and experimental energy weapons. The attacks had no effect on the Devourers themselves, but they served a different purpose. Each weapon burst contained hidden subroutines, quantum viruses designed not to damage but to confuse. Every blast carried contradictory information: mathematical proofs that 2 + 2 = 5, logical arguments that proved logic was illogical, philosophical paradoxes wrapped in scientific equations. The Devourers recoiled as their absorption mechanisms attempted to process information that couldn't exist. For entities that had consumed the knowledge of thousands of civilizations, encountering deliberately nonsensical data was like poison to their systems. Dr. Foster watched the readings with growing excitement. It's working. They can't adapt to information that's intentionally self-contradictory. We're feeding them logical paradoxes, and their systems can't resolve them. But even as they celebrated their tactical success, the sensors detected something that made the bridge crew fall silent. In the distance, beyond the immediate battle, space was beginning to tear open. More Devourers were arriving, drawn by the commotion. And these new entities were different, larger, more complex, as if the local Devourers had called for reinforcements. Lieutenant Kim's voice was barely a whisper. Captain, I'm detecting at least 50 new contacts. Some of them they're the size of small moons. Webb stared at the tactical display and realized that humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. They had picked a fight with entities that had destroyed civilizations for millions of years, and somehow they were winning individual engagements through the sheer audacity of fighting with weapons that shouldn't work and tactics that made no logical sense. But winning battles and winning wars were two different things entirely. All hands, prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace, Webb ordered. We've learned what we came here to learn. Now we need to get this information back to Earth before these things figure out how to counter our paradox weapons. As the Defiance prepared to flee, Dr. Dixadel, Foster detected one final signal from the debris field, a weak emergency beacon from what remained of the Zephyrian colony ship. Hidden deep within the wreckage, a small group of survivors had witnessed humanity's first battle against the Devourers, and for the first time in months they dared to hope. The Defiance jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it the most important intelligence in galactic history. The knowledge that the Devourers could be fought, confused, and temporarily defeated. But they also carried the terrifying understanding that humanity had just made itself the primary target of entities that considered the consumption of entire galaxies to be a natural biological function. The war for reality had begun, and humanity had fired the first shot, using weapons made of organized insanity and controlled chaos. It was, the crew realized with a mixture of pride and terror, the most human thing they could have possibly done. The emergency session of Earth's United Colonial Government had been running for 18 straight hours, and tempers were beginning to fray. The massive holographic display at the center of the chamber showed Captain Webb's face, transmitted via quantum relay from the edge of known space, his report playing for the 7th time. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood at the head of the military delegation, her weathered features showing the strain of processing information that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. "The tactical implications are clear," she said, addressing the assembled representatives. "These Devourers represent an existential threat not just to Earth, but to every human colony. If Captain Webb's report is accurate, they consume information itself. Our entire technological civilization could be absorbed and turned against us." Director Catherine Voss of the Colonial Authority slammed her palm against the conference table. "That's not the most pressing concern right now. According to Dr. Chen's xenocommunication logs, there's an entire galactic civilization out there that's been hiding from us for centuries. We've been living in a cosmic zoo, and we didn't even know it." The revelation that humanity had been essentially quarantined by an advanced galactic council had sent shockwaves through Earth's political establishments. Every colony governor, every military commander, every scientific director was demanding answers that no one had. Dr. James Harrison from the Institute for Xenobiological Studies cleared his throat. "I've been analyzing the linguistic patterns in the Zephyrian transmissions. Their language contains references to over 200 different species, suggesting a galactic community far more vast and complex than we imagined. The question is, why were we excluded?" Secretary of Defense Michael Crawford leaned forward, his expression grim. "Maybe we should be asking ourselves whether we want to be included. If this galactic council allowed an entire species to be wiped out rather than intervene, what does that say about their values?" The debate might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of an unexpected guest. Dr. Sarah Chan entered the chamber flanked by colonial security officers, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in days. But her eyes burned with determination as she approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, "while you've been debating politics, I've been monitoring communications from across the galaxy. The situation is far worse than we thought." She activated a new holographic display showing a map of the Milky Way galaxy. Red indicators marked dozens of systems around the galactic edge, each one representing a recent attack by the Devourers. They're not just hunting the Zephyrians. The entities Captain Webb encountered are part of a larger incursion. At least 17 star systems have gone silent in the past month, and the Galactic Council is doing nothing. Admiral Torres studied the display with growing alarm. "How many casualties are we talking about?" "Billions," Dr. Chen replied simply. "Entire civilizations are being consumed, their knowledge and technology absorbed by entities that grow stronger with each victory. And according to intercepts I've picked up from Council communications, they're terrified. They're calling emergency sessions, evacuating frontier worlds, and desperately searching for a solution." Director Voss stood slowly, her face pale as the implications sank in. "You're saying the most advanced civilization in the galaxy can't stop these things?" "I'm saying they've given up. Their military doctrine is based on containment and diplomatic solutions. They've never faced an enemy that grows stronger by consuming the very information they use to fight it. Every weapon they deploy, every tactical database they access, every strategic plan they formulate, all of it becomes part of the Devourer's collective knowledge." The chamber fell silent as the representatives grasped the magnitude of the crisis. They weren't just facing first contact with alien species. They were confronting the possible extinction of galactic civilization. Secretary Crawford was the first to speak. "What about Captain Webb's success against these entities? He reported that they couldn't adapt to paradoxical weapons systems." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "That bought them time to escape, nothing more. I've been analyzing the quantum resonance patterns from the Defiance's battle recordings. The Devourers are learning. Each encounter teaches them something new about how to counter our illogical approach to warfare." Admiral Torres began pacing, her strategic mind already working through the military implications. How long do we have? Based on their current expansion rate and the direction of their advance, they'll reach the outer human colonies within 2 years. Earth itself has perhaps 5 years before direct contact becomes inevitable. The weight of those words settled over the chamber like a shroud. 5 years to prepare for a war against entities that had destroyed civilizations spanning thousands of years of galactic history. But then Director Voss asked the question that would define humanity's response. What are our advantages? Doctor? Chen's exhausted expression brightened slightly. We're insane by galactic standards. Every other species I've monitored approaches problems logically, systematically, with careful planning and measured responses. They build their militaries around predictable tactics and proven technologies. And that's an advantage how? Asked Governor Martinez of the Titan colony. Because the Devourers have learned to counter every logical response. They've absorbed the knowledge of hundreds of species, all of whom thought rationally about warfare. They've never encountered a species that deliberately uses weapons that shouldn't work, tactics that violate common sense, and strategies based on controlled chaos. Admiral Torres stopped pacing, a dangerous gleam entering her eyes. You're suggesting we fight fire with madness. I'm suggesting we fight an enemy that consumes rationality with the one thing it can't process, organized irrationality. Captain Webb's crew stumbled onto something profound when they used contradictory information as a weapon. What if we could scale that approach up to an entire military doctrine? The concept was so audacious that it took several moments for the implications to sink in. Human military history was filled with examples of unconventional warfare, asymmetric tactics, and strategic innovations born from desperate circumstances. Now they were being asked to apply those principles against an enemy that existed partially outside normal reality. Secretary Crawford leaned back in his chair, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're talking about weaponizing human unpredictability. I'm talking about turning our greatest weaknesses into strategic advantages, Dr. Chen corrected. We're the only species that's independently developed dozens of ways to destroy our own planet. We fight wars with everything from rocks and sticks to antimatter bombs. We're the only civilization that's produced philosophers who argue that logic is fundamentally flawed, scientists who embrace uncertainty as a principle, and artists who create beauty from chaos. Admiral Torres was already sketching out preliminary plans in her head. We'll need to completely restructure our military doctrine. Traditional command and control systems won't work if we're deliberately introducing randomness into our tactical decisions. More than that, Dr. Chen added, we'll need to rethink our entire approach to technology. Instead of building systems that work perfectly every time, we need to create weapons and defenses that function through controlled unpredictability. The discussion that followed would have seemed insane to any rational observer. Earth's leaders were seriously proposing to defend their civilization by deliberately making their military forces less logical, their weapons more chaotic, and their strategies more confusing. They were planning to fight cosmic horrors with weaponized absurdity. But as the hours passed and the plans took shape, something remarkable began to emerge. Humanity's natural tendency toward creative destruction, their instinct for finding innovative solutions to impossible problems, and their sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat were crystallizing into a coherent military philosophy. They would fight the Devourers not by outthinking them, but by out-madding them. Within days of the emergency session, orders went out to every human military installation and research facility. Project Babel was born, a crash program to develop weapon systems based on paradox, defense networks that operated on controlled chaos, and tactical doctrines that embraced uncertainty as a fundamental principle. Dr. Angela Foster, freshly returned from the Defiance mission, found herself leading a team of physicists, philosophers, and artists tasked with creating what she privately called impossible weapons. Their first success was a plasma cannon that fired rounds with randomly variable energy outputs, making it impossible for adaptive defenses to predict or counter its effects. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer O'Sullivan worked with Earth's top programmers to develop AI systems that deliberately introduced logical errors into their own code, creating digital entities that thought in ways that no rational being could predict or understand. The most ambitious project fell to Colonel Sarah Kim, promoted after her performance aboard the Defiance. She was tasked with creating an entire fleet of ships designed around the principle of aggressive unpredictability. These vessels would use engines that operated on contradictory physics, weapons that violated their own operating principles, and navigation systems that introduced deliberate randomness into their calculations. But perhaps the most important development came from an unexpected source. Professor Michael Chen, Dr. Sarah Chen's brother and a specialist in applied psychology, proposed something that initially sounded absurd. training human crews to think in fundamentally irrational ways while maintaining their sanity and effectiveness. What we're asking people to do, he explained to Admiral Torres, is to embrace cognitive dissonance as a tactical advantage, to hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously, make decisions based on intuition rather than logic, and operate complex machinery through organized chaos. It should have been impossible. But as the training programs developed, something extraordinary emerged. Humans, it turned out, were naturally gifted at thinking in paradoxes. Their brains were already wired to hold contradictory ideas, process incomplete information, and make leaps of logic that shouldn't work but often did. The Devourers had spent eons learning to counter rational thought. But humanity was about to teach them that there were forms of intelligence that existed outside the boundaries of logic entirely. As Captain Webb prepared to lead the first squadron of impossibility fighters back toward the galactic edge, he found himself reflecting on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a simple exploration captain. Now he was leading humanity's vanguard in a war against entities that consumed reality itself. But as he looked at his crew, scientists who had learned to embrace uncertainty, engineers who had perfected the art of controlled failure, and soldiers trained to fight with weapons that shouldn't exist, he felt something that surprised him. Confidence. The Devourers might be cosmic predators with the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. But they had never faced an enemy that fought with weaponized insanity, powered by the sheer human refusal to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. It was time to show the galaxy what organized chaos could accomplish. The Battle of the Shattered Nebula would be remembered as the day humanity announced to the galaxy that some wars could be won through organized madness. 27 human vessels faced off against a Devourer fleet that had just finished consuming the Kepler system, absorbing the knowledge and technology of 3 different civilizations in the process. Captain Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the redesigned TCS Defiance, watching as reality twisted around the approaching enemy. The Devourers had learned since their first encounter with humanity 6 months earlier. These entities were larger, more sophisticated, and they moved with the accumulated tactical knowledge of every species they'd consumed. But humanity had been learning too. All ships, this is Admiral Webb. He spoke into the fleet communication array, his promotion having come with the weight of commanding humanity's most unconventional military force. Remember your training. Think illogically. Act paradoxically. Fight with weapons that shouldn't work and tactics that make no sense. Around him, the bridge crew operated systems that violated every principle of sound engineering. Lieutenant Sarah Kim navigated using a computer that calculated their position by solving equations that had no solutions. Commander Elena Vasquez targeted weapons through a system that aimed by deliberately missing. Chief Engineer O'Sullivan maintained engines that ran on the principle of controlled failure, growing more efficient the closer they came to breakdown. It should have been chaos. Instead, it was the most harmonious his crew had ever been. Contact in 30 seconds, Commander Vasquez reported. The Devourers are scanning us, but our paradox shielding is confusing their sensors. They're reading our fleet as simultaneously existing and not existing. Dr. Angela Foster, now serving as the fleet's xenobiological warfare specialist, monitored the bioquantum readings from her science station. The Devourers are attempting to adapt to our signatures, but they can't process information that contradicts itself. It's like watching a computer try to divide by zero. The first exchange of fire lit up space with impossible colors. Human plasma cannons fired bursts of energy that changed their own properties mid-flight, making them impossible to defend against. Torpedo salvos launched missiles that exploded before being fired, creating causality paradoxes that punched holes through the Devourers' quantum-shifted hulls. But the enemy wasn't helpless. The Devourers responded with weapons based on pure information warfare, attempting to rewrite the mathematical constants that governed human technology. They fired beams of concentrated logic designed to force rational behavior on their targets. The counterattack should have devastated the human fleet. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The logic beams struck human vessels and simply bounced off. Admiral Webb's crews had been trained to think so irrationally that pure logic couldn't take hold in their minds. Across the galaxy, representatives of the Galactic Council watched the battle through long-range sensors with mounting disbelief. Ambassador Kethvar of the Hegemony cycled through every color in his species' emotional spectrum as he processed what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he transmitted to the Emergency Council session. "The humans are winning. They're actually pushing the Devourers back through tactics that violate causality itself." Chairman Zorthek, observing from his command ship at a safe distance, felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia, hope tinged with absolute terror. The humans aren't fighting the Devourers. They're outmatting them. On the TCS Defiance, Admiral Webb watched as one of the largest devourers suddenly began to convulse. The entity, which had absorbed the tactical knowledge of 17 different species, was trying to process how human weapons worked and failing catastrophically. "Sir," Dr. Foster reported with barely contained excitement, "the lead devourer is having what I can only describe as a logical breakdown. It's absorbed so much contradictory information from our attacks that its consciousness is fragmenting." The sight that followed would haunt the nightmares and inspire the legends of every galactic species for generations to come. The massive devourer, an entity that had existed for millions of years and consumed entire star systems, simply unraveled. Its reality-warping form collapsed as its mind tried and failed to process the fundamental paradoxes that human weapons had forced into its consciousness. But even as they celebrated this victory, Admiral Webb realized they faced a larger problem. The dying devourer was transmitting its experiences to the rest of its kind. Within minutes, every devourer entity in the galaxy would know about humanity's paradox warfare. "All ships, prepare for immediate withdrawal," Webb ordered. "They're learning how to counter our—" His words were cut off as space around them exploded with new arrivals. But instead of more devourers, the quantum disturbances resolved into ships bearing the insignias of the Galactic Council. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of different species, all arriving at once in the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Admiral Kethvar's voice crackled through the communication array, speaking in accented but understandable English. "Admiral Webb, this is the Galactic Council Emergency Fleet. We offer our assistance in this battle." Webb stared at the massive fleet that had just arrived to support them. Ships of crystalline beauty, organic constructs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, mechanical marvels that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. After 3,000 years of isolation, humanity was no longer alone. But the real surprise came when Chairman Zorthik's ancient voice joined the conversation. "Admiral Webb, we owe your species an apology. We isolated humanity not out of malice but out of fear. Your people approached warfare in ways that terrified us. Now we understand that your apparent madness might be the galaxy's salvation." The combined fleet that faced the Devourers represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Rational species fighting alongside deliberately irrational humans, their logical tactics complemented by humanity's organized chaos. The Devourers found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't predict because half of their opponents were using strategies that made no sense even to their allies. Dr. Foster monitored the bioquantum readings as the battle intensified. "Admiral, the Devourers are adapting faster than we anticipated. They're learning to compartmentalize their consciousness, creating separate cognitive processes to handle logical and illogical information streams." But humanity had one more trick to play. Admiral Webb activated a special communication protocol that had been developed by Earth's Psychological Warfare Division. "All human vessels, initiate Protocol Babel." Across the human fleet, specialized transmitters began broadcasting something that no devourer entity could have prepared for: pure human cultural output. Music that embraced dissonance as beauty. Poetry that found meaning in meaninglessness. Comedy that derived humor from the absurdity of existence itself. Philosophical arguments that proved their own invalidity. Art that was beautiful precisely because it violated aesthetic principles. The effect on the Devourers was immediate and catastrophic. Entities that had consumed the logical constructs of 1,000 species found themselves trying to process cultural expressions that celebrated irrationality as a virtue. Their consciousness absorption mechanisms, designed to integrate coherent knowledge systems, began to tear themselves apart trying to understand why humans would deliberately create things that made no sense. One by one, the devourer entities began to withdraw, their forms flickering as they retreated into the spaces between dimensions. For the first time in millions of years, they had encountered something they couldn't consume, a species that had weaponized the celebration of illogic. As the immediate threat faded, Admiral Webb found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding humanity's first diplomatic contact with galactic civilization. Chairman Zorathek's ship moved alongside the Defiance, and for the first time in 3 millennia, representatives of the Council requested permission to come aboard a human vessel. The meeting that followed in the Defiance's conference room brought together beings who had evolved on worlds separated by thousands of light years, but who now shared a common understanding. The galaxy was far more dangerous than any of them had realized, and survival would require cooperation between rational and irrational approaches to problem-solving. Chairman Zorthek, his ancient form smaller and more fragile than his reputation suggested, spoke carefully as he addressed the assembled humans. "We isolated your species because your approach to conflict terrified us. You seemed capable of destroying yourselves and everyone around you in pursuit of victory. We believed you were too dangerous to join galactic civilization. Admiral Webb nodded thoughtfully. And now? Now we understand that some problems require dangerous solutions. The Devourers represent a threat that rational approaches cannot counter. Your species' gift for controlled madness may be the only thing standing between civilization and cosmic extinction. Doctor! Foster leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. What do we know about the Devourers' origins? Where do they come from? Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline form pulsed with somber blue light. They are the remnants of previous galactic cycles. Every few billion years, the universe undergoes a reset event. Most life is destroyed, but some entities survive by existing partially outside normal reality. The Devourers are what remains of species that chose consumption over extinction. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just fighting alien invaders. They were battling the ghosts of entire galactic civilizations that had chosen to become cosmic parasites rather than face their own mortality. How many galactic cycles have there been? Webb asked. We don't know, Chairman Zorthek admitted. The Devourers carry the absorbed knowledge of dozens of previous galaxies. Each civilization they consume makes them stronger, more intelligent, more capable of surviving the next universal reset. Webb felt the weight of cosmic history settling on his shoulders. Humanity had stumbled into a conflict that spanned billions of years, and their success had been based on sheer bloody-minded refusal to think logically about impossible odds. But as he looked around the conference room at his crew, engineers who had learned to embrace controlled failure, scientists who had weaponized uncertainty, and soldiers trained to fight with organized chaos, he realized something profound. Humanity's gift wasn't just illogical thinking. It was the ability to find hope in hopeless situations, to create meaning from meaninglessness, and to fight impossible battles with the expectation of victory. The Devourers had spent eons consuming civilizations that approached existence rationally, but they had never faced a species that viewed existence itself as a glorious, irrational adventure worth fighting for, regardless of the odds.
So what happens now? Admiral Webb asked.
Chairman Zorthek's multiple eye stalks focused on the human commander with something approaching wonder. Now we learn to fight like humans. Your species has shown us that some problems require solutions that make no logical sense. Perhaps it's time for the galaxy to embrace a little organized madness. As the joint human-alien fleet prepared to return to Council space, Admiral Webb realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had been invited to join galactic civilization, not despite their chaotic nature, but because of it. The universe was vast, dangerous, and filled with threats that rational approaches couldn't counter, but now it also contained a species that had turned irrationality into an art form, madness into a military doctrine, and the celebration of chaos into a weapon capable of driving cosmic horrors back into the darkness between worlds. Somewhere in the depths of space, the Devourers regrouped and planned their next assault. They had learned much from their encounters with humanity, but they had also learned to fear something they had never encountered before, a species that fought with weapons of pure cultural expression and tactics based on organized insanity. The war for the galaxy was far from over, but for the first time in millions of years, the forces of order and chaos were fighting on the same side. And the universe would never be the same.